This chapter of One Piece was so good that I had to call the paramedics. I very excitedly got into my office ready to record this video, then promptly collapsed due to something slipping in my back, not good. Spent a lot of time on the floor, and one ambulance later, here's my ECG. Heart just fine, it's good. But against better advice, I am sneakily recording this before I go off to fix my assorted health problems. And with this very short window of time that we have, we'll start with the cover story. Because Who's Who has made his grand return back into some sort of relevance, and I don't want to skip past it because there's every chance that it could end up being relevant to the Elbaf arc. That is, should Who's Who be one of these Oni people who have the blood of the ancient giants. Oda's been very intentional with the timing of his cover stories lately, and this is slotting in rather perfectly. And this whole situation is reminding me of Kozuki Oden because it appears that Who's Who and Who's Who's crew have been abducting women to staff his own personal pussy palace. And if this had gone on for much longer, then I imagine that we could have seen a second harem revolt, which is when everyone rose up against Oden because he kept taking all their wives. And something I do find funny is that Who's Who has only just adopted the Wano attire, and he's looking a lot like Wano Trafalgar Law, actually. But it is very much, hello, my fellow samurai, after spending a decade subjugating them and refusing to wear their clothes that whole time. But aside from the cover story, this chapter has no chill whatsoever and is a very early contender for one of the best chapters of the year, because this sort of stuff is going to be real difficult to top. So right from the beginning, we're talking extremely casually about Shanks' history, the guy who we've been wanting to know more about ever since 1997. And crazily enough, there's not even one flashback panel of him. And I quite like this choice by Oda because it's usually very tempting to add a vague flashback drawing with some silhouettes to add some nice visual flavor. However, what we need to remember is who's narrating this. And that would be Figeland Shamrock. And I think it's quite powerful to just have him say this as matter-of-fact words, instead of coupling them with a drawing of the past, because it shows how detached Shamrock is. The fact that he's talking about his brother in such a clinical nature and he doesn't even care enough to conjure a mental image for us, the readers, to look at, shows us that there's no emotional attachment to Shanks at all, not even anger and or disgust at the idea of what Shanks has chosen to do. Shamrock is just perfectly neutral during this part, which is a very scary thing, because it reminds me of the mentality of the Five Elder Stars. Shamrock speaks as someone who has managed to detach themselves from humanity on that same extreme level as the Elders have, and it's very disconcerting because at least with the regular world nobles, you always kind of know what they're thinking, because they can't help but open their gluttonous pig mouths to spew out every thought that manages to squeeze past the very narrow gap in their brains. But there's also something really scary about composure, and as we see later, Shamrock is capable of going from 0 to 100 in an instant, as he goes from completely neutral to summoning the guardian deity of hell to destroy his enemies. However, by far the most interesting piece of information to me is that Shanks has actually returned to Marijois at some point, but decided that that life wasn't for him and proceeded to yo-ho-ho his way across the seas. But of course you've got to wonder, exactly when did this happen? It was definitely after Roger's execution. Actually, I probably shouldn't say definitely. Very dangerous word. Because maybe there is a crazy scenario where Roger returned Child Shanks to the world nobles and then Shanks said, "Don't leave me here, Pirate Dad." But my first thought was Buggy's flashback in chapter 1082, where all of a sudden Shanks changed his mind about finding his own ship, crew, and setting sail to Laugh Tale, causing Buggy to throw a bit of a shit fit. But what Shanks says is, for now, I don't feel like trying to get there. That was 24 years ago. And we don't have any information about what Shanks was doing up until 2 years later. 22 years ago is when Shanks arrived at Syrup Village to recruit Yasopp, which is often thought to be almost right after Roger's execution because they were both East Blue events. But Shanks could have blown off going to Laugh Tale with Buggy because he, for whatever reason, wanted to meet his biological family at Marijois. And whenever this did happen would be when Shanks acquired his sword Griffin, the same style of blade used by both Figeland Garling and Shamrock, which is kind of cute because it would imply that Garling welcomed his son home with whatever the world noble equivalent of open arms are, and either had this sword waiting for him, which was made for him since birth, or Garling had Griffin made for Shanks upon his return. I mean, there are other options. Shanks could have did the pirate thing of stealing it from Garling and thus making Garling make a new sword. But I don't know what Shanks would have been doing for these 2 years. However, I wouldn't discount the chance that he very briefly trained as a holy knight under his father and was spending an extended period of time on Marijois for some reason. Maybe it has to do with uncovering the various secrets hidden around there. Stuff like the national treasure that Doflamingo knew about. But hey, perhaps Shanks even stumbled into the very cold room with the massive straw hat that we saw Emu examine that one time during the reverie. Although speaking speaking of Doflamingo, I imagine that Shanks' story would have made him ever so angry. The fact that Shanks had the chance to return to the Holy Land, whilst Doflamingo desperately wanted to do so and was denied. I guess Shanks hadn't committed any crimes against the world nobles. The story could have been that he was abducted by Roger, bad man, and this was a long-awaited homecoming. And poorly thought out transition is exactly why you should check out the Calm Belt, which is a channel currently undertaking the project of re-editing the Grand Line Review video library into themed compilations. Very long videos perfect for your very long-form activities like driving, drawing, gaming, sleeping, whatever it is you do for extended periods of time, we've got you covered for as long as it takes, with no need to pause what you're doing and pick a new video every 15 minutes or so. They're not just compilations either, because throughout the years there have been what I refer to as lost videos. And these are Grand Line Review projects that were fully written, recorded, and edited. However, for various different reasons, were never published. I'm not going to tell you where they are, how many there are, or even what they are though, because that's not really in the spirit of One Piece, is it? My videos, well, they're yours if you want them. I left everything I own in the link in the description. So if this new long-form channel meets your needs, then please do check it out and make sure to subscribe, because that is insanely important for small channels, and I look forward to seeing you there. But for now, let's get back to you, me. Thanks, me. But all of this talk about Shanks' family actually extends to Luffy's group, and it's very nicely contrasted by an adorable moment in this chapter where Luffy comes across the giants. They say it was Shanks who attacked him, and Luffy vehemently denies it. Although the most adorable part is actually Nami. She's been unusually chill throughout this whole endeavor, but I love that little laugh she lets out when Luffy's defending Shanks. And Luffy then says that Nami would do the same if someone was talking shit about Bell-mère, which is true, but Luffy says Mori-mère, Mori meaning tree-mère. And I love this because you can tell how strongly Luffy associates Bell-mère with those tangerine trees. And because he never met her, and also because he didn't really, listen to Nami's backstory, he's just like, oh yeah, tree-mère, that's alright. And the adorableness continues when Luffy takes the time to deliberately exclude Buggy from being Shanks' family aboard the Roger Pirates, and little does he know that Buggy was probably closer to Shanks than anyone aboard that ship. But right at this moment when they're saying this, a thing, because as if everything else in this chapter wasn't enough, we also see the man who was drinking with Crocus rocking up to Oris Castle, and he has to be coming into contact with Luffy in the next chapter or so. It feels like it's been forever waiting for this guy, and I'm gonna cut him some slack because if there's any island to be slow to arrive on, it's Elbaf, just because of the colossal amount of distance that needs to be traversed. But holy crap, at this point I just need to see this guy, and I'm glad that this mystery will seemingly get solved in the next chapter, maybe the one after at most, just because I'm getting tired of calling this dude Crocus's friend. I'm very ready for him to have a name, and I'm also very ready for that name to probably be Scopa-Gabon. Because a thing happens here, and that thing is called juxtaposition. Whilst we see the panels of the cloaked man guy making his way to the castle, we have Luffy talking about how the Roger Pirates were Shanks' family, strongly hinting, if not maybe outright giving away, that this man was a former member of the Roger Pirates. So if it isn't a Roger Pirate, then this is just a crazy red herring. But if it is a Roger Pirate, I don't know what other options there are other than Scopa-Gabon. So prepare yourselves, internet citizens, because this may be the very first time in One Piece fandom history where a Scopa-Gabon theory has been correct. They've been around longer than I've been around, and really this is one of the things that hails the incoming end of One Piece. Even Scopa-Gabon is finally revealed, and we're in the endgame. But back to Loki, he has asked a very interesting question of Shamrock, not just because it relates to Shanks, but because it proves that Loki can actually see. Bandages across his face be damned, he was able to recognize that Shamrock has the same face as Shanks. So I wonder if this is either some other advancement of observation haki, or maybe even a built-in feature of his legendary Devil Fruit, some sort of crazy vision that required him to be blindfolded to quell its effects, but still allows him to see through. Although probably not, because he is in those sea stone cuffs, so anything Devil Fruit related in theory shouldn't be able to be activated. Either way, something weird is going on here with Loki's sight, and that weird thing is that he has it. Although nothing is wrong with Shamrock's sight, as he is visibly disgusted by the idea of needing to act directly against Loki, hence why he summons Kerberos. But as they speak more, it is very clear that there's definitely a gap in hierarchy between Gunko and Shamrock, and I do think that's because he's a world noble and she probably isn't. The world noble part wasn't omitted from Gunko's introduction box, she just probably doesn't have that status. And even though they're both Holy Knights, Shamrock definitely has a certain status about him that makes both of them want to prevent him doing anything with his own hands unless absolutely absolutely necessary. So Gunko's kind of like Shamrock's squire. But also speaking of status, I do have a slight update regarding Shamrock and Garling, because previously the assumption was that Shamrock had taken Garling's role after his promotion, but this is not true. It was clarified by the Library of Ohara that Shanks was introduced as the Dancho, which very simply means captain. However, Garling was labeled as the Saiko Shinrikan, meaning the supreme commander. And this might be a similar situation to the Marines, where there's a fleet admiral who's in charge of all operations and logistics. However, there is a supervisory role above the fleet admiral, being the commander-in-chief, a position that was, and I think still is, occupied by Kong. But I wanted to put that out there. Garling is still in overall command of the Holy Knights, but Shamrock is the one with the operational command and discretion. And his operational discretion in this case is to show us the beyond fantastic ability of his sword, which can transform into Kerberos, the Guardian of the Underworld, which makes history in and of itself, because this officially kills one of the oldest theories in the One Piece fandom, which is that Blackbeard has the Kerberos fruit. This was one of, if not the first thing that was suggested when the connection was made between Blackbeard and his Jolly Roger with the three skulls. Because Jolly Rogers in One Piece are, a couple of exceptions aside, almost always stylized depictions of the captain. So it was once thought that because of these three skulls, Blackbeard would eventually have three heads himself. And there's nothing stopping him from eventually doing that, I guess, if Shamrock is defeated or just, decides to leave the sword here, because why not? And Blackbeard chooses this fruit to take, then all of the prophecies will be fulfilled. And I will say that it's great to finally see a threatening devil fruit weapon, because they've generally been jokes, not that I don't love Lasso or Funkfried, or even the filler ones like Alpacachino, who will always hold a special place in my heart, but this trio of good boys is on a whole different level. And there's also a really fun pun here that probably won't translate well into English. When Loki asks, "What the hell is this?" Shamrock responds with "Watashi no Kenda," which means this is my sword, but it can also mean this is my dog. The kanji says sword, but the way you say ken can also mean dog. So it's very clever, and I feel like that should be appreciated. And that pun may in fact be the sole reason why Oda decided to draw this. He does stuff like that. And this whole situation has been something that was hinted at when Oda was talking about which devil fruits he'd give each of the Straw Hats. And when it came to Zoro, Oda said that he would have Kaido's devil fruit, only he would imbue it into one of his swords. And ever since that answer, I have been waiting for something like this to happen. This is a mythical Zoan weapon, which means that it probably does a hell of a lot more than just your usual cut, slicing, stab, jabbing. And whatever that thing is, it has now left Loki in a rather precarious position. And this may be the reason why Loki gets freed. If there's, say, a scenario where the only way that Loki survives is to get them sea stone cuffs off, and if Loki can use his devil fruit to heal or something along those lines, then Luffy would 100% do it, because he already has a very favorable impression of Loki. But something that I'm a bit mixed on in this chapter is the resolution of Loki and Shamrock, because Shamrock, with his mate, he entered this story so powerfully, but it does slightly annoy me that he's gone and done the boring bad guy trope of, here's the thing that's probably going to kill you, and I'm just going to leave assuming that it does, thus giving you an opportunity to defy my expectations. I know that Shamrock says to Loki that if you survive, you can come fight me later. And I guess you can also justify it as being the attitude of a world noble. Shamrock legitimately does not care if any being lower than him lives or dies. But villains clocking off without finishing the job for no good reason is just one of those not One Piece tropes, not manga tropes, but media in general tropes that kind of annoys me, because it makes me feel like the author kind of screwed themselves over and couldn't come up with a better way to end this encounter. And look, before we move on, I do have to be that guy and say, as much as I love Gunko's devil fruit versatility, it does remind me of the words of a certain Birdman who once told me that there were only 5 flying devil fruits. Quite specifically, Pell said, "You're lucky to see this. Only 5 flying devil fruits are known to exist." That's what he said. But no, Pell, only 5 flying devil fruits are known to exist to you. A guy who spent his entire life on Alabasta, because with Gunko's devil fruit, we're now well into the 20s and possibly even the 30s. I don't keep track anymore. It's impossible to keep track of every fruit that allows its user to fly. But all that aside, Gunko continues to be pretty damn amazing. I love this fruit. With the plan from here being to abduct children, which means that I'm no longer just excited for Luffy to meet Shamrock, but also for Colin to meet Shamrock, given how much he idolizes Shanks and even asked to join his crew. And this could also be Colin's opportunity to show the spirit of a brave warrior of Elbaf. If all the kids get abducted, then Colin is going to be the only one who is in any way prepared to fight. He won't win, but he may show why we shouldn't be so quick to abandon the traditions of Elbaf. And it would seem that this arc is rapidly escalating as Shamrock has decided to summon a 3rd Holy Knight. And what are the odds that this knight gets imported to the same location, Norris Castle, where Luffy and his group currently are? That might even give our Scopa-Gaban man a chance to prove himself in battle combat, like how Ray Lee got to show off against Kizaru. And then there's the mural. Look, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even try to dive into that in this video because there is just too much there. Because every time I look at it, I see something new, and every time I reread the Harley text, I also see something new. This mural is one of the most important 2-page spreads ever produced in One Piece, and we will go through it methodically, bit by bit, in the next video. But for now, I've got to go fix myself.